you have to have the courage to honor what it is that you're going through. And so if you're feeling like you're in a certain point where it's like, God, everything around me is just forcing it, then maybe you just got to put it down. Happy Monday. Welcome back to another episode of Morning Coffee. I'm your host, Rick Alexander. You can follow me at @RickAlexander_ or at the Morning Coffee Podcast on Instagram. We have a new Clarity Academy that's going to launch in 1 month on October 16th. So if you're interested in creating some self-awareness in your life, figuring out like what are you like? You know, most people don't know. We exist with shadows and blind spots and coping mechanisms, and we've been told the world is one way, and it's just not always so. And so if you're interested in working through some of those things in your own life so you can figure out what you really want and what you really want to do with your time here, then hit me up and we can talk about getting you in that course. Registration is going to open next week. Again, Clarity Academy starts on October 16th. So this past weekend, I had 3 athletes that were competing in ultramarathons that I had trained. And with one of them, I was going through a game plan on what to expect on race day. And, you know, Mike Tyson's got that quote, everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face. Ultramarathons are a lot like that. Like you are living one way and then all of a sudden the pain train comes and the plan tends to go out the window. So what I like to do is really come up with like 3 points. Like if you can stick to these, it will help you. I know that when you're 70 miles in and everything hurts, there's going to be moments where your entire game plan goes out the window. You got to work on your feet. You got to eat. Maybe you got sick. Like who knows? There's a million things that could come up and a million things that could go wrong that could take you out of the race. And so if we can come up with like 3 principles that are going to help you, that could change the entire outcome, because you can always just lean back on some of the principles, knowing that the game plan may fall apart in the face of extreme adversity. So what I'd like to do this week is I'm going to talk about some of the lessons that we've learned from ultramarathon running. What I'm going to call this series is Lessons from the Trails Less Traveled. And it's about some of the lessons in ultramarathons that you can apply to your own life, regardless of whether you ever even run 400 meters around a track or not, because these are life lessons. And as I was looking through the principles, I was thinking like, damn, this is stuff that could really change your life if you could apply it. And so I'm going to keep the actual ultramarathon talk pretty low in this one, because you don't really need to even know what the hell I'm talking about in order to understand what it is that I'm talking about. Because I'm going to make this applicable for you, but just understand an ultramarathon is anything past a marathon. So there's a lot of aid stations. There's a lot of times to get off your feet and eat, because you're typically moving anywhere from 30 miles to 200 miles. There's aid stations, and they tend to be sprinkled out throughout the course. Now, one of the game plans that I like to come up with is I like to look at the course and I like to look at aid stations. And normally I'll come up with a time frame. Like I have a projected pace, a projected time that I'd like to be. And of course, you don't want to go too slow, because there are cutoff times where they'll actually pull you from the race if you're moving too slow. And so what I like to do is I come up with a certain amount of time before I get to the aid station in which I'm going to get off of my feet and I'm going to eat. Even if I'm not going to eat or I'm not going to do anything, I'm going to just get off of my feet. And I like to come up with that before I go to the aid station, because it helps me to become more disciplined in the approach. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. See, when you find yourself in adversity, it's really easy to let adversity change how you feel. That's one of the reasons on here where I've talked about don't ever quit something when you're in the midst of the suck, because your perspective on what it is that you're going through is totally skewed if you're in the middle of too much adversity. If there's too much pain, well, then of course you're going to want to quit. So before you get into something, you've got to make up your mind on how that thing's going to go. And then you have the discipline to hold yourself to it. And so coming up with a game plan, having the discipline to hold yourself to it, will help you in those moments where adversity is going to start changing your point of view, because it might, what I've seen happen is a lot of ultra runners will come into aid stations, they'll get off their feet, and instead of being off their feet for 5 or 10 minutes, they'll stay there for 30 minutes. Sometimes you just have to, but sometimes you're going to fall back on your timelines. You're not even going to want to get back up. I've seen that a few times where I've sat down with people at aid stations and then it's time to leave and they're like, I'm not getting back on my feet because it hurts too much. And so come up with those times before you get into them. Now, where this matters in your life is you're going to ebb and flow in your workflow and your productivity and your enthusiasm for life itself. And this is what I want to talk about. This is the main point today. You're going to go through certain things in your life where there are going to be times where you feel lazy. There are going to be months where you feel lazy as well, or unproductive or unmotivated, and you're just trying to figure it out. Now, beyond a month, that's probably going to become an issue. But look, there are certain weeks where I've realized I can't create anything. I'm like barely hanging on, and I've got to figure out my own workflow in order to, of course, create content and do stuff like that. But there are just some times where you're feeling unmotivated. This is a matter of courage. You have to have the courage to honor what it is that you're going through. And so if you're feeling like you're in a certain point where it's like, God, everything around me is just forcing it, then maybe you just got to put it down. Have the courage to honor what you're going through. Have the courage to get off your feet and to take a rest. But then you have to have the courage to know when that time is over and it's time to step back up. So with the human condition, we have this immense desire to really simplify things. We want to say like, man, that person's lazy, that person's motivated. But the reality is we're all things, and we're all of going through them all the time. And you probably have seen this in yourself. There are times where you just want to kill it. Like you're just ready to crush, you're motivated, you go to the gym, and then there are other times where you're just not. What I'm here to say is that that's okay. It's okay if there are times where you're not motivated to do certain things. Have the courage to give yourself the time to put things down. Now, a lot of times you just have to do the bare minimum, right? And what I do in times where I'm going through moments of feeling unproductive or lazy is I figure out, well, what do I have to do to keep the ship afloat? What do I absolutely have to do? And I just hold myself to that bare minimum. Perhaps I need to go in the gym and I just need to work on the underlying progression, but a lot of the accessory work is going to not happen this day or this week because I'm just not feeling it. But there comes a time where I know that time is over. If you guys remember the lesson that I had in Lion King, that's Hakuna Matata, right? There's a time to put things down. There's a time to enjoy life or even to just rest and just be lazy. But there's also comes a time where you have to step back up to the plate. There comes a time where it's time to accept the responsibility of your path, of your life, of your truth, and start stepping into that. Have the courage for both. Have the courage to give yourself the time that you need to be lazy and work through things that are going on with you, and have the courage to know when that time is over and to not prolong it. You don't want to get stuck in either, right? You don't want to simplify. You're not lazy and you're not motivated. You're both, and you're going to go through both at different times. And if you can understand that and you can have the courage to be both, what I'm finding in my own life is that everything just flows so much more smoothly. When I would go through these lazy times in my past, I would do my best to force it. I'd be like, oh, I got to go to the gym. I got to get content done. But you know what it left me with? Frustration. Because how many times have you forced something in your life and had it actually work out, right? It never works. You can't force a relationship. You can't force workflow. You can't force a workout. You just cannot force things that aren't right. And so there are times where you have to accept that and not force it. And then there are times where you realize like, that time is over. It's time. It's time for me to step back up. You can get the wind knocked out of you. That's not the problem. The problem is if you get the wind knocked out of you and then you decide that laying on the ground is your new constant state. It's not. You just went through something, and now it's time to go through something else, to step back up, see what else life has to offer. Have the courage to do both, and you won't limit yourself so much in this life, and you'll actually probably find more flow. At least that's what I found in my own life. It's like as I go through times of being more lazy, I just put things down, and then I understand like 2-3 days are going to go by, and then I'm going to be ready to write again. I have to have the self-awareness to honor what I'm going through in that space in myself. But then you step back up and then you keep moving on. And the only thing that's actually changed, whereas I used to force it and now I don't, one thing that happens is motivation comes back a little bit earlier, right? Sometimes what you see with CrossFit Games athletes, for example, is after the CrossFit Games, their coach always programs a full week off, or hopefully at least a week off. The reason being is because that hunger is going to come back for that thing. Sometimes you got to step away from it. And that's what I found. As soon as I feel like I'm forcing it, I just stop. And it's like 2 or 3 days and it'll come back, where it used to be, I'd go through a week, maybe even a month or two of forcing it. And so I actually do get the hunger back quicker. So I'm actually being more productive by not being productive when I'm not feeling it. But the only way that works is when you have the wherewithal to know it's time to step back up and the courage to actually do it, and to not prolong these times of indecision or times of laziness or apathy or whatever it is that you're going through. You're going to go through this shit regardless, and you're not going to be able to change that. So if you're going to go through it regardless, have the wherewithal to honor it in yourself. Give yourself the space to go through whatever it is, and then the courage to step back up so you can get back on your way. And again, The biggest thing that changed, even though I guess my workflow's increased because I've done this, the biggest thing that's changed is just my personal satisfaction with my life has increased. And that's the best part. I'm not forcing things. I don't feel like I'm forcing things. There's been a few times in my life where I've been in an ultramarathon and I've gone to an aid station with somebody else and we've sat down and we've talked and I had a timer going and the alarm goes off and I don't think about it in those moments, because if I think about it, I won't want to get up. And so as the alarm gets off, I just get up and I start getting myself on and start heading down the road. And I can think of 3 or 4 times where the person that sat next to me just chose not to get back up, right? We think of courage a lot of times as having the sort of gall to face the outside world and what you might be going through. But a lot of times we don't have the courage to face the inner world. And sometimes we'll even go through a lot of outer things to not have the courage to face the things that are going on inside of us. Motivation is something that goes on inside of us. So have the courage and the self-awareness to honor those and use them to increase your life and not be so adversarial, not so against yourself, not so trying to force things in your own life. And I bet it'll change your life quite a bit. So that's lesson 1 from the Trails Less Traveled. I love you guys. We'll talk tomorrow on the Morning Coffee Podcast.
Oh, we will rise. We will rise until we die. Until we die. Until we die. Until we die. Oh, we will rise.
morning, remember you were younger and did everything you wanted. Didn't ever worry, only had a dream and you chased it. Now you realize your time was wasted, driving up the whack shit. Look at those who make it, takes hard work and practice. Nothing comes easy, they say.